Where did your interest in journalism start?
Well, I've always liked talking to people. I grew up in downtown Seattle, well, in between Seattle and Philadelphia, but always in the inner city. So I just grew up talking to people all the time. But I had a high school teacher named Calvin Shaw, who was my journalism teacher. And he kind of would let me leave school for hours at a time to go report on stuff in Seattle, like the Occupy movement, hang out with juggalos, investigate the Silk Road, the guy who just got freed, the dark net web's drug service. And he was just like a really positive role model. And so he encouraged me to go to college for journalism, went to school in New Orleans, kind of just took off from there.
When did you realize you could turn it into a business?
Probably during All Gas No Breaks, which was owned by a parent company called Doing Things Media, and we started just making a Patreon to host extended cuts of certain scenes. The actual situation where I realized how lucrative journalism could be was, again, in Las Vegas, not at the tunnels, but at the AVN Expo, which is a pornography event. For whatever reason, we thought it'd be a funny idea to interview people in the midst of an adult video shoot. So interview people during it and be like, hey, what's up? What's your favorite Disney movie? Stupid, juvenile. I was 21 years old, right?
So they were in the middle of engaging
in intercourse, yes.
How did you get in that room?
The male porn star is named Sean Lawless from Fort Lauderdale. He was a fan of All Gas No Breaks, and his friend Kendra Cox, they were planning on doing a scene. He was like, dude, I love your videos. I loved Area 51 and Burning Man. You want to film with us? And I pitched him the concept, and he was like, sure, that's never been done before. As soon as we even indicated that we were doing that, obviously everyone was like, where can I find it? Where can I find it? And then Reed, who's the CEO of Doing Things, was like, we should make a Patreon and paywall it so people can pay $5 a month if they want to see this uncut scene. Dude, 20,000 people signed up overnight. People are weird. I don't know why. You know how the internet is.
Yeah.
And so that was the first scene where I was like, Jesus, people are willing to pay extra for things you can't see on the surface net. Obviously, we didn't recreate that particular scene again, but it worked in the future with other interviews, especially during 2020, during the censorship, when obviously YouTube would take certain stuff down, like QAnon rallies, Flat Earth Conference. That couldn't fit on the surface net.
Wow.
Or obviously not the service net, but the public Big Four.
So if you were to explain this All Gas No Breaks thing, maybe how you got into it, what that was like for you, in just a minute or two, how would you do it?
Well, All Gas No Breaks was the name of a zine that I wrote when I was a teenager about hitchhiking across the U.S. It was like a book, maybe 60 pages, short stories about my experiences. I didn't go on that trip to write a book, but I wrote it about 2 years later because I wanted to have something to show for my 4 years in college.
Yeah.
So I made that, and then simultaneously I started a show in New Orleans called Quarter Confessions, which was drunk Bourbon Street tourist interviews. It was like taxi cab confessions inspired party street show. So that caught the eye of a company called Doing Things Media, who wanted to basically invest in a TV show or a digital web series. And so I pitched All Gas No Breaks and the book and Quarter Confessions kind of combining to where it was like a hitchhiking traveling interview show out of New Orleans but across the country. The hitchhiking concept didn't really work that well. It initially was supposed to be every interview subject is somebody that picks me up on the side of the road, but it just didn't really work. It was just the technical needs were just awkward. It's kind of hard to film somebody in the car. So we ended up just making it a roving series going from festival to convention to political rally and so on.
So for All Gas No Breaks, how did they approach you? And what was
Email.
that? Email?
Yeah.
And what was the pitch?
Hey, we liked Quarter Confessions. What do you think about, making a show for our network? Or, you can produce it, you can direct it, you can edit it, and then we'll distribute it for you.
And then they got all monetization rights for that?
Yeah, so how it started off is I negotiated a salary. I think it was $45K a year, which coming out of college is pretty sick. Yeah. And an RV, which costs $20K. So I had my dad pick up the RV after I convinced them to let me buy it. They gave me the salary. I just hired my friends, and that was that.
And how much were you making before then?
Nothing. Oh, I was actually working as a doorman at a seafood restaurant in New Orleans called Bourbon House. So I was making $500 a week, which is pretty solid.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And then how long were you with All Gas No Breaks before a fallout?
Year and a half. But I'm actually on good terms with all those guys now.
So what ended up happening? My understanding was that, from hearing you, is that there was a disagreement and they just fired you.
I mean, this is a classic story. I think that I learned a lot from this situation. I think they did too as a company, because from what I've heard with their new shows, they have a new show called No Cap on God, and they pay that dude super fairly, and he seems to be having a great time. So I guarantee you that they learned a lot, and so did I. But what ended up happening is that the show became wildly successful, more successful than we possibly could have anticipated. We're talking about bringing in merch drops, bringing in $1 million per merch drop type. You know what I mean? And I'm still receiving something like 20% of profit split and a $45K salary. So it's kind of disheartening when you see $1 million coming in a month and you're making, less than, 250,000.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally I would have negotiated with them, but I asked for 50%. And I basically said, if you don't give me 50%, which seems fair to me, I'm gonna quit.
And they thought you were replaceable.
Yeah, that was their miscalculation. And mine was creating such like a hard ultimatum that made it almost impossible for us to negotiate.
What would you have done differently in hindsight?
I mean, nothing. That's just generally my cardinal rule. I was 22 years old. I probably, would have tried a more peaceful negotiation process. But at the same time, their mistake, I think, was bigger than mine in thinking that I was totally replaceable. Like, they literally thought, I remember they told one of the prospective hosts, like, hey, we have a bunch of connections in the comedy world. Like, Andrew is just a glorified mic stand. We can find somebody else. Little did they know, when that situation was made public, the fans turned on the whole company. But that's what happens when you have these like corporate focus groups who are kind of like think that they're running when really the artists actually run.
Yeah, you really can't replace a personality, I've noticed.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where people subscribe and watch for that person. It's
Yeah.
less about the content. Like, if someone replaced you on your channel, but everything else
Yeah.
is the same, most people just wouldn't watch. I feel like I watch just as much for you as I do the content itself.
But on the other hand, too, you can have me, and then if I introduce a host as an extension of our apparatus, and people know that I'm still involved, everybody's on board.
Mhm.
Like right now, we're having, hosts from across the world, from Mexico, New Zealand, Australia, Israel, everywhere.
Yeah.
And they're doing interviews, but it's under sort of our blessing. So nobody's upset.
Yeah.
But it's more like when you replace somebody, they feel like they're being personally,